restoring men in history, restoring the Constitution, restoring the Republic. The Declaration of Independence. It's Independence Day coming up, where we celebrate our freedom from Great Britain. And what a magnificent document the founders wrote. Thomas Jefferson, of course, was the chief author, and there was a committee. You now have the ability, because of this document, to use your mind in business, create things, write music, write films, make movies, start businesses. Freedom. Freedom to have friends with whom you want to be friends with. Freedom to meet in groups and assemble, which was written into the Constitution, Declaration, and then Constitution. Freedom to defend yourself with the Second Amendment in the Constitution, Bill of Rights. Freedom to speak your mind, even if it disagrees with the federal government or hurts someone's feelings. You can disagree about a policy, a law. You have freedom of speech in America because of what these founders did and wrote on this document for you, for your freedom. It's about freedom. If you think it's important to build better, stronger men, please subscribe. We would appreciate it. You get to choose your religion, worship in the way you want. There's no federal church. Chief author was a man, Thomas Jefferson. A group of great men changed the world. And we should be grateful for what they did when we celebrate this Independence Day. They fought for and won our freedom. So now you have many choices, and you can use your mind and faculties to do what you want in life, to choose your profession, to choose your friends, to create a family and be protected, to buy property and have that property protected in theory. Thomas Jefferson wrote the first draft, a man, a founder, president of the United States later. He wrote the first draft in a room sitting alone in Philadelphia in 1776. Can one man have an impact? Can you have an impact? Can a group of men have an impact? Of course, we all can. A group of women. These men had an impact on the world, and it has lasted if we keep it. And it is up to us. They had courage, wisdom, resilience. They were willing to risk it all, their lives, their fortune, and sacrifice. They had magnificent sacrifice. These men sacrificed everything. If they failed, they would die. But they risked their lives for freedom. They were exceptional men, and we should honor them this month. As we celebrate the document and independence, let's celebrate these men. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Patrick Henry. And I'm not just talking about the people that signed the Declaration. I'm talking about all the men in the Revolution when I say all these names. It's important for men to look at great role models, aspire to have an impact and make a difference, to have a larger purpose than yourself, to have a purpose. It's important we know our history as Americans. We have a rich history. It's a wonderful history, and it's a magnificent country, America the Beautiful. George Mason had written the Virginia Bill of Rights, Declaration of Rights, before this document. So Thomas Jefferson, they were both Virginian. Patrick Henry was a Virginian. George Washington was a Virginian. A lot of great Virginians. Virginians can be proud. Magnificent Virginians. James Madison, another Virginian. Some people like to attack the founders and attack men and attack women. Manly men, feminine women, founders. But we should celebrate them, honor them for their sacrifice and their honor. Look at today and think of what these men would do today if our Constitution was being denigrated. If a centralized government was usurping power and abusing the power of the states and people, what would they do? What are you going to do? Peacefully. Peacefully. The Stamp Act was around 1765. It created an outrage. Americans, colonists were outraged. The patriots, the Americans. And they stood. Patrick Henry took action immediately with the Stamp Act resolves. He was a founding father, and by the way, he was mostly educated at home. the great Patrick Henry, and he didn't seek power, neither did George Washington. That's something interesting. Patrick Henry risked it all. He had children, but he still took the risk. It cost him money to help during the war and be the governor of Virginia. At one point, he was the gentleman who stood up and said, I do not know what course you may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. And he meant it. And he had children. Liberty was important to Patrick Henry. Other men risked their lives. Every man that put his name on that piece of paper risked his life and fortune and family for you and your freedom. That's why they did it. Why'd they do it? Freedom. Would you do that for freedom today? Would you do that for freedom of speech today? Thomas Jefferson wrote, he was not striving for originality of principle or sentiment. Instead, he hoped his words served as an expression of the American mind. What characterizes the American mind today? What will the men of today do? We need men like this in society. Men who are willing to risk it all for freedom and principles. But let's talk about the document. They were willing to take the risk for what? Freedom. Are you willing to stand up peacefully for the ideas in this Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? And to protect and defend the Constitution. It needs your protection. It protects you, you protect it. Are you willing to do the difficult work of restoring the Constitution? Because that's what will protect you if you protect it. What does the Declaration say? Let's read a little bit of it today. First, they state they will declare the causes which impel them to the separation. They're going to lay it out on a piece of paper. Now remember, this has been going on for around over 10 years. And let's read it. And you remember this. It's beautiful. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Did you see what they stated there? They state where your rights come from right away. Where do they come from? Not government, God. You get your rights from God, not government. And they lay it out, the Creator. Now remember, some people like to say this nation wasn't based on Christian principles, but it was. In the 1730s and 1740s, there was the Great Awakening. What awakening was that? That was a Christian awakening. It was preceded the American Revolution. Jonathan Edwards wrote the famous speech, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, the Great Christian Awakening. So endowed by your Creator, you're created by God. You have a purpose down here. The rights come from God. You're made in His image, right? Male and female. Now he goes on. What is the purpose of government here? To what? To secure these rights. What are those rights? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. George Mason, in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, also put in property, right? There was a lot of talk of property back then, so your property is protected as well. A lot of times I will say property when talking, because it was a word written often back then. Now, here's the question. They're about to talk about abuses. Is your federal government today, and have they been following the Constitution, that important document that protects you and your family and your property and your life and liberty? Are they following it? The federal government, the Supreme Court, the Congress, the executive branch. Are the three branches of government following it? Under that, are the administrative agencies following it? Well, that's the question, and of course they are not and have not been for a long time. We'll maybe pick out a couple of cases to go over. You don't want an unconstitutional federal government grasping for more and more power, centralizing power, moving it up there, taking your what? Freedom. Taking the future of your children away and moving the country away from freedom to tyranny. many unconstitutional acts. That affects and damages your freedom. What does the great Constitution do, and how does it protect you? Well, it restrains the government, right? And it created the separation of powers. It also gave you the Bill of Rights, but those combined, the separation of powers and the Bill of Rights, you need both. And it restrained, and it also defined clearly, and most of the powers are Article 1, Section 8, define the powers of the federal government, mostly right there. There's other powers as well outside of Article 1, Section 8. But the majority of the debate and argument comes from Article 1, Section 8. That's all they can do. Specific powers. Limited, specific few powers were given by the states to the federal government. That's in the Constitution. Who gave them their power? Defines the powers of the federal government, few and defined. That's what was ratified. Let's go back to the Declaration of Independence and read a little more of it. Where does the government get its power from? He says it here, deriving their just powers from the consent of whom? The governed. You, the people, and then the states ratified the Constitution. But right now we're on the Declaration. So right here he's expressing that you, the people, hold the power, not the elites in Washington, not the elites in Wall Street, not an oligarchy, not just a few people, you, the people. You have the power. That's where they derive their power from. Now let's go on. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect what? Their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. It should not be changed for light and transient causes. The Constitution was written that way, to be difficult to change things. And there's a process, by the way, later. This is the Declaration for Changing the Constitution. Article 5, judges can't change it, Congress can't change it, the president can't change it. You have to go through the amendment process. So who has to protect it? You, the people. Who has to protect these ideas? You, the people. Not the government. You have to protect yourselves, too. Hold the government accountable. The government has to protect you. You have to protect the Constitution. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. Here's the good thing. All we need to do is restore the Constitution. Difficult. Very difficult, not easy. But again, in 1776, this wasn't easy to break away from the mightiest empire in the world at the time, the British Empire, Great Britain. They had it really difficult. We just need to restore the Constitution. It's there. It's on a piece of paper. They didn't do the amendments properly, so we can do it. It can be done. We just need to curtail it. If we restore the Constitution and teach virtue to men again, because you need virtuous men to oversee and administer the Constitution, right? They work together. You need a Constitution, and then you need virtuous men. A nation of laws and men, not just laws. Without virtuous men, we're in trouble. Without the Constitution, we're in trouble. So it takes men to uphold, defend the Constitution. Let's go on. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Did you hear that, man? It's their duty to throw off such government. Now, it's your duty to peacefully advance ideas. And do all of this peacefully with ideas. We can win the battle of ideas. We have the truth, gentlemen. And when you have the truth, you can win. Will it take work? Oh, yes, a lot of work. But it's your duty to peacefully advance the ideas of the Declaration of Independence and the ideas of the Constitution and protect and defend the Constitution peacefully. We want to do it peacefully. That's the way to do it. What they want. That there's a faction in America that wants violence. We don't want violence. We do not. We have the ideas. We have the truth. And we must win with ideas peacefully. You must get out in your communities and you talk to every person you can about the Constitution, about freedom, about the Declaration, and advance these ideas. Advance them. Not just stand, advance them. Because it's important to their freedom, their children's prosperity, and their children's posterity, their children's children. You have to get them to understand. You have to listen. You have to understand them. You have to explain it well. You must talk about how important our magnificent Constitution is for freedom, why we must defend and protect it. The Constitution restrains the federal government, but it only works with men of courage and virtue. Men with morals, the founders stated. So you need a Constitution and you need men of virtue. So, men who are looking ahead, men are looking at something larger than themselves and not just trying to enrich themselves from government. You need leaders who care about the country and you, not just leaders who are trying to enrich themselves, not just leaders who are trying to stay in power forever. Patrick Henry and George Washington both walked away from power. Patrick Henry didn't even want to go the centralized federal government. He turned it down multiple times from Washington. Washington wanted to get out, and he did get out. You see, these men didn't seek power, Patrick Henry and George Washington. They gave it up. Men who look ahead to what they are doing and building and look to posterity in the future and look to protecting the future of our children. Who are concerned about the future of America and the ideas of America and this Constitution. Who are invested in protecting it. We must restore the Constitution that was ratified with amendments. And we need to also be talking about repealing the 16th and 17th, but that's for another day. Going on, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity, which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Remember, this has been going on here for over 10 years. And what's been going on in America today with our Constitution? Decades and decades of abuse of our Constitution, trying to strip powers, trying to end the 10th Amendment without amending it, trying to just take power without going through the amendment process, trying to circumvent the Constitution, this beautiful document. Power. Men who like power like a centralized government, and they want to take power from the states. But remember, the Constitution protects you and your family. So 2 things in America we must do: restore the Constitution and what? Teach men in the home, it's not a government duty, about virtue. Teach men in the home about virtue, restore the Constitution, and you'll fix a lot of problems. Will you fix them all? Of course not. It's not utopia down here. We never thought we could create that. Madison knew about human nature. Human nature is still concurrent. There's going to be problems and ills, but government can't fix it all. It's only fixed in another place. So we need men that value and uphold when they take an oath to the Constitution and uphold it. People get caught up debating unconstitutional laws. They're just simply unconstitutional. It doesn't matter if they're good, by the way. It doesn't matter if a law is good. It matters if it's constitutional when the federal government's doing it, Congress, and it can't abuse your state constitution either. But we're talking mainly about the Declaration of Independence and a little bit about the Constitution today. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over these states. Does that sound familiar today? Does the federal government want tyranny over the states? Well, they certainly abuse the power in the 10th Amendment, for sure, right? And they have for a long time. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So what did you just learn over the last 3 years? What did you learn looking at the election? What did you learn from COVID about the federal government? What have you seen with your eyes, heard with your ears? Open them up. Listen. Be aware. How long have elected politicians, bureaucrats, the administrative state ignored and trampled on our beloved Constitution? And These are the injuries of the day. They injure you, they injure your property, they injure your family. And again, can be handled with ideas peacefully. They take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. We should hold them to it. They pass unconstitutional laws and create unconstitutional agencies. That damages your freedom. That damages your future. It hurts the future of your children and their opportunities. The larger government grows and gets harder it is for your children to build great businesses, create things, do what they wish. Freedom to use their mind, choose what they'd want to do. Department of Education, unconstitutional, clearly. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say you'll create a Department of Education, right? So we must end the unconstitutional agencies peacefully with ideas and free speech and work toward that. Will it be difficult? Yes. You are the people. And if they did this, you can do that. Imagine they defeated the greatest empire in the world, the British Empire. Went through the American Revolution. I can tell you stories about that, but not today. This is about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution a little bit. It was arduous. The trials and tribulations when I read the biographies of George Washington and the other biographies and the other books on the American Revolution. Arduous. What Washington went through, a great man. We should salute George Washington today, Independence Month. July should be the whole month of independence. They have another month for something else. It's not courage. So here's to George Washington, a great man, founder, by the way, father of the country. He should be celebrated. Now, if they can stand against the British Empire, you can stand up and restore the Constitution. It can be done. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. Your Supreme Court, Congress, and executive branch have all transgressed the Constitution for decades and decades. Right to privacy, that made-up thing for so many cases. Right to privacy, where's it in the Constitution? It's not. Usurping what amendment? The 10th Amendment. Rights of the states and the people. Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. If you want to do them in a state. Unconstitutional acts. Now, you'd have to find a way to phase out because people are already accustomed to it. But the point is, they were unconstitutional. That's the point. They transgressed on the rights of you and the states, the people, when they do unconstitutional agencies, unconstitutional acts. It's serious. And that leads to what? Tyranny. That faction knows that. They never did an amendment wiping out the 10th Amendment, by the way. It's not been repealed. So it's on the books. So you just have to restore the Constitution. Everything's on the books for you. Again, clearly the Constitution defined the powers of the federal government, and they have abused it. We're comparing that to what they were abused then, right? It was a big centralized power. They didn't want that again. That's why when they wrote the Constitution, they didn't want it to happen again. Never again. Article 1, Section 8 defines most of the powers, but there are other powers. Now, some of these cases, I've looked at a lot of different cases. We could stay on this all day. We'll just pick a couple of where the abuses are, which denigrates and damages your U.S. Constitution and thereby your freedom and your family. And we'll take this from fee.org, 15 cases that shredded the Constitution by Sean Rosenthal. Helverine versus Davis, 1937. This is a good one. I mean, a bad one. Helverine upheld the constitutionality of Social Security on the basis that Congress has a general power, he says, this is to spend on whatever it deems to be in the general welfare. So that was completely unconstitutional. Really bad case. I think I've mentioned it before in videos. We've definitely mentioned it in the groups. Completely unconstitutional. Again, damaging your freedom for what? Power, control, moving power to the centralized government, moving toward tyranny. Attack on the 10th Amendment, usurp the power of the states. Really bad, because we ratified a wonderful, beautiful U.S. Constitution. That piece of paper is just the most wonderful government document ever created. See how these people want more power? Power is never enumerated in the Congress. They're way beyond their powers. Rosenthal states, this ruling completely upended the system of enumerated powers in which Congress only had the powers delegated to it by the Constitution, right? And he says it eviscerated the 10th Amendment that restricted the federal government to its defined role. So we've talked about this many, many times, Federalist Paper 2, 3, and other times, all through these videos for a long time, about the 10th Amendment, Virginia Declaration of Rights. So if you were going to do an entitlement, where would it be? You'd have to debate that in the state legislature in the state, not the federal government. So the Supreme Court was dreadful. It usurped the Constitution, denigrated it when it was sworn to uphold it. What else? Wickard versus Filborn. This is an amazing one about a farmer in Ohio, Roscoe Filborn, I believe it was his name, 1942, and this shows complete tyranny. One, it allowed Congress's power to regulate interstate commerce, to be used to regulate purely local and essentially non-commercial activities. I've gone over this case at the last conference, so we could go into it a lot more, but we're trying to get through this today because it's really about the Declaration. But what is the point here? Why did I bring up these cases today? Trampling on and abusing the Constitution. They were going through abuses. You're going through abuses, you see? So you have things to be upset about that you can resolve peacefully with ideas. Chevron USA Inc. versus Chevron USA Inc. versus Natural Resources Defense Council Inc. 1984. He says the ruling granted administrative agencies broad deference in creating regulations based on administrative interpretations of laws, and thus granted administrative agencies of the executive branch broad lawmaking powers. Of course, why is that wrong? The executive branch can't write laws. The only person who can, the only government branch that can write laws is the Congress. That's it. Supreme Court can't write laws. They tried to. Remember Obamacare? They tried to write the tax in. Unconstitutional all the way. Not even debate. Obamacare is unconstitutional. Federal government was never given health powers, period. It wasn't about the tax. Federal government does not have health and police powers. That was never ratified for them. That would resolve everything not defined stayed in the states, remain in the states. Separation of powers, important to Madison. Talks about that in the Federalist Papers. Very important to have separation of powers. That prevents what? Tyranny. That highly damaged separation of powers. Going on. He has dissolved the representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. They would just shut down, not let them meet, shut down the representative houses. One time in Virginia, when they did it, Patrick Henry said, hey, boys, let's go down and meet in the tavern. And they kept meeting. Ideas. See, what happened in that tavern helped lead to the revolution. Men talking and gathering. Ever notice they don't want men talking and gathering? What did they not want during COVID? Assembly, churches, right? See how they take Bill of Rights, peacefully assemble. And I always say peacefully. Peacefully assemble. Ideas win. We have the truth in ideas. You have the freedom of assembly written into the Constitution. Tyrants don't want you to meet and discuss ideas. He has refused for a long time after such disillusions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. What could be the issue today where you feel or think you're abused? Another issue. How about election integrity, election interference? Do you think there's any election fraud? Or was there any election fraud in 20 and 22? Did we have election interference? Well, we know that, right? You had Russian collusion. You had the Twitter files where they wouldn't let all that information get out about Hunter Biden. People have been polled. They said that would have affected the election. So a federal agency directed Twitter and what they could or could not say. The First Amendment protects that. Freedom of the press shall not be infringed from the federal government. It actually protects those companies and those individuals from the federal government. So they directly broke it. What happened to them? No accountability. Nothing has been done. No powers have been stripped from that agency. We just love the Constitution. Mail-in balloting seemed dubious from the beginning, right? We called that ahead. We said this is a problem. Big problem, and it was. So why don't we have one-day voting with valid IDs, no machines? And who opposes that? And why would they oppose one-day voting with paper ballots, no machines? Of course, the states must do this, not the federal government. But we must have fair, transparent elections with a voter ID. We must talk about that often, demand that, work toward that. We must regain trust in the system. Free, fair elections are important in a republic. If you don't have trust in a republic, we are in enormous troubles. To be represented, elections must be fair and honest, and they must be transparent so we know it, so that we have faith in the elections. Because who has the power? You, the people. So if you can't believe in your vote, you've got a problem, and people will become demoralized. Do you feel elections in America are free, fair, honest? Do you feel we need more transparency? It's up to us to do it. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. So we have a border problem, southern border. It's an incredible problem. The asylum issues used to go around the system. We talked about that in Federalist 3, so we're not going to go through it here. But people use asylum. They get a phone, then they wander around the country for 6 years and don't show up to the court date. Some of them. It says between 40 to 60% in many different articles. So anyway, let's go on. The sovereignty of America and the states. We must have borders and we must have sovereignty. It protects you. It protects your citizenship. And it damages the citizens when we don't have that. It cheapens your citizenship. And how do you learn to love America if the schools are teaching hate America, hate the founders, hate George Washington? And they just know about one thing about it. They don't know the greatness of the man. They don't know how he led that at Princeton. So anyway, again, the Department of Education is unconstitutional and it needs to be ended for sure. And if you can, homeschool. Get your kids out of the school for a lot of reasons. We're not going to stop and go into that, but there are a lot of reasons. Peers, influence, just the stuff they're teaching, right? It's not good. So if you can, and the Department of Education must be ended. So even if you take over the school board, you've still got the Department of Education sitting there. But you got to take over the school board if you have to leave your kids in. But anyway, he has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. Boy, that's a big one, right? Justice Department should never be weaponized. Judges shouldn't be weaponized. And they shouldn't be political. They should follow the Constitution and treat everyone equal under the law. We know that that doesn't always happen. We know that sometimes we've had rule of law and picking the people to go after and not, we've had rule of man, not rule of law. We want rule of law in America. It's an American principle. Activist judges in the Supreme Court should never write laws because why? They don't have the constitutional authority. They're way beyond their powers, judges, federal judges, and Supreme Court justices. So that's an abuse, right? It's abuse to your freedom, your rights, and the Constitution. That's what it's an abuse to. They can't write laws. They were never given that power. Separation of powers. Judges can't write laws. Going on. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. See, they were concerned about the judges and we're concerned about the judges. Judges can't have power beyond what was given to them constitutionally. That's the problem. That's the issue. They can't be in areas they're not supposed to be in. And how often have they not followed history? I mean, followed the Constitution throughout history. Again, on laws and on judges, it doesn't matter what they think is good or what you think is good or what anybody thinks is good. It matters if it's what? Constitutional. If we want a constitution, let's stand up for it and defend it. Constitution is really what protects you. So we can't just say, well, that was a good one, so let's go. No, it's either constitutional or it's not. That's the only parameter. It has to be done through the right process. So we have to go back and fix all these mistakes, undo them. And again, if they beat and defeated the British Empire, we can do this. It can be done. You're the guys to do it. He has erected a multitude of new offices. Oh, this is a big one, right? And sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out of their substance. Does this sound familiar today? Think of the Department of Agriculture, EPA, FBI, CIA, Department of Education, and all the other departments, which are. So these agencies can harass people. We've seen it at the school moms, at the school boards, on and on. We could talk about this. We're not going to stop here, but you've seen the abuses, right? That's why you want a constitution. Police powers are at the state level. Again, the federal government was specific few powers, defined powers. So the police powers were retained by the states. Where in the Constitution does it create a federal police force? Well, it doesn't. So you can't have a federal police force unless you do an amendment. So that's a problem. EPA, where is that in the Constitution? It's not. So you can't have an EPA without an amendment. Same with the Department of Education, Department of Energy. So you got to go through all these. You see the attack always taking, what's it for? Power, control, money, right? On the 10th Amendment, because that gets in their way, right? Tyrants don't like the 10th Amendment. Tyrants abhor the 10th Amendment. They want all the power flowing up to Washington. People that want centralized government want all the power flowing to Washington when it's in their interest. And suddenly, when it's not in their interest, they talk about states' rights. Have you noticed that? So the 10th Amendment protects you and what? Your freedom. Going on. He kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislators. That was a big deal, not to have standing armies in America. It was debated. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. So the founders ratified civil power over military power, right? They did not want a dictator. This was the point of this. They didn't want some dictator. Where's the Constitution talk about war? Article 1, Section 8, to declare war. Who has to do it? Congress, not the president. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. That's because they were weary of military presence and standing armies. What are we doing sending all these weapons to Ukraine? What are our agencies doing running around the world, starting problems and issues and wars, trying to topple governments? That's a problem. Unconstitutional. Not in there. Where does it say we're supposed to run around, topple governments, and change governments? Article 2, Section 2, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. So notice the line, when called into actual service, right? Going back to the Declaration, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. See how they wanted power and control then, and see how they wanted power and control today. They wanted to centralize it, rule America from England. They're trying to do that in Washington and take power from the states, and they have been. Again, most of these unconstitutional laws strip powers from the states and hurt your freedom. Treaties, we have a constitution, we have a Declaration of Independence. You can't subvert our God-given rights and the Constitution with a treaty to be under the United Nations or the WHO or whatever. Can't subvert the Constitution. Back to the Declaration now. At every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by what? Repeated injury. Now listen to this line. This is a great line. John Wilson, pay attention. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Have you been listened to? Are you talking about ideas peacefully? Are you advancing our ideas and standing for them? They did. They did it for about 10 years. They kept going. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant. Watch for that. Prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant. What is a tyrant? Someone who would ignore, abuse, denigrate the Constitution, right? Who would take power that he doesn't have, to centralize it. Going on. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. So they have tried and tried and tried, and they're not being listened to. They're more than frustrated now. They're getting angry, right? They're getting mad. They've been mad, actually, for a long time, some of these guys. But here's the thing. Great Britain won't listen. In fact, they double down and make it worse. Have you noticed certain agencies or people doubling down and making it worse, right? So there's a lot of similarities, right? Do we see rule of law? Is everyone equal under the law? Do you see that? I think we know that's not true now. Are you talking about that enough? So they appealed to their native justice. They wanted justice. Listen to this one and see if it resonates with you. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. See, that's today. You see rule of man, not rule of law. You see politicians that are deaf, agencies that are deaf to you, the people, not listening, not caring, arrogant, not. You see some of those Senate hearings the other day with Ted Cruz? Totally arrogant. Doesn't care about the people. Doesn't feel that he's a servant, you can tell. Feels above the people. Many of them do. We've seen it over the years, how above us they feel and think that they are and wield their power in the way they want. They feel untouchable, right? Arbitrary justice is not good and it's not American principle. So he was saying consanguinity, that he didn't want a close connection. And the parliament did not listen. The king did not listen. They were what? Deaf. Just like many in our centralized government appear, in the agencies. They appear deaf to what you want, to your needs, to being servants. The politicians and these agencies care what you think today. Many do not. You've seen it. Not only do some of them not care what you think, they don't even want you to speak now, right? You had the Twitter files. They've tried to censor people. That came from the federal government. They tried to censor stories. That's bad. That breaks the First Amendment, but it's just not good in a republic. We have to have free speech in a republic. You, the people, need to be able to speak out. And what were the consequences of that? Nothing, right? There were no consequences to the Twitter files, to the agency that did that, as to my knowledge. That's not good for a republic where people aren't held accountable in those high positions, especially at that branch and that agency. It's just not good overall for Americans. And lastly, he ends with, he's got a couple of more points. Enemies in war, in peace, friends. So they had to be patriots and stand up for their principles. And you have to stand up in peaceful ways and advance these ideas peacefully. It's up to you. Lastly, let's read this beautiful passage. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states. That's beautiful, isn't it? Freedom. They fought for freedom. Independent states, free and independent states. See that they also, notice, appeal to a higher power than themselves, God. They have multiple larger purposes in their life And the authority of what? Authority of you, the people. They stated. At the end, they end with this: we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. That's a great line. I love that line. It's magnificent writing. They pledge to each other their lives, fortune, and what? Sacred honor. We don't talk about enough about honor. Honor meant something then. The virtues meant something. Courage meant something. They had courage and wisdom and showed their virtues. They were willing to die for it. They risked it all. They were the men who stood in the gap for you, for your freedom today. And today, we need to be the men who stand in the gap peacefully for these ideas and for American principles. We must be the ones who restore the Republic, restore the Constitution. This magnificent, beautiful document, the Constitution. And remember the ideas of the Declaration. This Independence Day, talk to your families, talk to your neighbors, talk to everyone you can, and not just at Independence Day, the week before, months after, all this next year. See how many people you can talk to about the Constitution. This is the action step. One person a week. You want to have an impact, you want to make a difference, you can do big things, films, write songs, all these other things, but here's something we can all do. We can all talk to one person a week. Some weeks we can talk to 3 or 4. Some weeks we'll miss a week. I get it. But imagine if you talk to 52 people a year. So put it on a yearly scale. You talk to 52 people a year about freedom, why it's important, the Constitution, why it protects them, why it protects their children, why it protects their family, the limited few specific powers of the federal government, the Constitution, and how it protects them. That's what we can do, everybody, every week, every day. Listen to them. Don't act like Washington. Listen to them. Care about them. Care about them and their freedom. Care about their children. Don't wait for Washington, D.C. to do it. Certainly not Wall Street, Silicon Valley, corporate America. It's got to be us. And it's certainly not the Department of the Unconstitutional Department of Education, which we've talked about, to do that. Because that's unconstitutional and needs to be ended. Far from it. And they're not, all of them, many of them, teaching how great this country is. You've seen it. Honoring the founders, teaching about the greatness of the founders and these great documents and how magnificent they are. Many times you see they teach the opposite. The founders were this, just, and that. They're not teaching the gratitude to be an American and these virtues. But they shouldn't be. They should be taught in the home, though, that gratitude. Again, all of this should be taught in the home. Department of Education is unconstitutional. So we have to do it. So let us go forward with the American mind. Listen to others, don't just talk. Bring people along. Talk about freedom and why it matters. The Constitution and how it protects them. Takes men of virtue executing and administering the Constitution, and it takes a Constitution. We need both. Men of virtue are taught in their home. Constitution is written. We must deal with it and bring it up and talk also about free, fair, honest elections. Work toward election integrity. Without honest elections, the Republic won't last. We'll be in tyranny. Your freedom is at stake. The time is now to stand peacefully for these ideas, for the Constitution, for American principles. We must have transparency, one-day voting, paper ballots, and signature idea. Otherwise, we won't trust it. We must have election integrity, not election fraud. We can't be thinking there's election fraud. We can't have election interference. Elect constitutional candidates, vet them, campaign for them. But mainly, what you can do every week is talk to someone about how important these ideas are in the Constitution. That's what you can do. It's up to us to restore the Republic and the Constitution. Again, We can all talk to people every week or every 2 weeks, but in the end, we can all make it a goal to get to so many people by the end of the year. That's a doable thing that you can do. It is up to us to restore the Constitution, to restore the Republic, to teach values and virtues in the home. Happy birthday, America. Happy Independence Day. God bless America. Thank you. If you think it's important to build better, stronger men for society, we would truly appreciate it if you would hit that subscribe button right now and help us build better, stronger men.